So here's a quick video documentary, so to speak, of how I run my light show. This is my 12th season running the lights, and I live in Gilbert, Arizona. So it's a beautiful January day here today. So I figured I'd walk around and talk about lights for a little bit. So, starting off here on the front right side of my show, I have a 2 wide by 6 tall P5 matrix, and those are indoor panels that I just put into a 1 by 2 or half by 1, I don't even know what they are, but just a little bit of a wood slat frame. So I build like a picture frame out of one of these, and then I put a picture frame like the exact same way, and then I put some concrete strapping in there. That's what actually holds the panel in place. And then I just wrap it with some Joanne fabric vinyl, and that seemed to be the cheapest way to do it. That's only roughly, I don't know, $8 a linear yard or something like that. It's a lot less expensive than the other panels you can do, either glass or plexi or Lexan. Here you can see the back of the panel. The back of the panel, I've just got a wiring block right there that I just bring in on one side I bring in the positive, and the other side I bring in the negative, and then distribute it to all the panels. Kind of like a spine going up the middle there. And then all the data lines come in on the left-hand side. There you can see that silver strapping that I use, that I attach the P5 panels to, and then I sandwich it between the two boards, and that holds everything in place. And then inside this little box here, I've got a beagle bone with an octo-scroller cape right down here. And that runs the 8 outputs to the panel. And I'm running everything off of a 5-volt, 15-amp power supply. And that is my P5 Tune 2 panel. These little trees up front are what I call my mini trees. They're about 3 feet tall, and they're just upside down tomato cages wrapped with some chicken wire. And I use the chicken wire because on these other trees back here, I didn't use the chicken wire, and they don't hold their shape very well. And I wanted these to look more like trees, so when I redid them, I made sure to put the chicken wire on there. And that did make a difference. It was worth it. And it also gives more tying points for the lights. And these are just super strings. They're just a red string and a white string on each tree. And they're incandescent, and it gives kind of a nice warm glow to the show. I run a hybrid show of kind of a mix between pixels and incandescent things. And that gives a nice, again, nostalgic feel to the show. All 7 of these trees up front are being run into little junction boxes. And in these little junction boxes, you will see here, inside here is a wired Cat 5 connection. Get that open here, hold on. And inside there, you'll see that there is a wired Cat 5, and then I just punched down little pigtails. And that's how I plug everything in. So one Cat 5 wire will run 2 trees, 4 colors, 2 red, 2 white. And then that way I can use cat wire from my trees all the way back to my controller. So if you look on the ground there are 2 red, a gray, a blue, a couple other colors. And that's how I run the trees. So the first 2 trees are on one circuit, the next 2 are on another, the next 2 are on another, and that last one's on a circuit by itself. And then I just run a small bundle of cat wire down the side of my show. You can see the blue, the 2 red, and the white down the side here, and then those run back to my controller box, which I'll get to in another video. Those are my mini trees. These are my, what I call medium trees. There are 8 of these in the show. These are upside down tomato cages as well, and I've doubled the tomato cages up just for a little more structure. And they're just wrapped with regular white and red incandescent lights. And they give a nice warm glow to the show. Very nostalgic feel to light displays of old, so to speak. And I've got these wired just the same way I have the front ones wired. I wire into these little project boxes These little CG 500 boxes, I believe they're called. These particular ones are Keptel. Let me get in there really quick here. Pull one of these out. And if we look inside the box, we're going to see there's a network connection in there. There's the network connection at the top with regular Cat 5 wire. And then I punch it down to these pigtails. And then I can plug in 4 lights at a time. And so that gives me enough to do 2 trees, one white and one red for each tree. So each one of these trees, again, is 2 channels, and I've got 8 trees in the show, so that's a 16-channel control board that runs them. And they all run back on this cat wire. You can see the gray and the black wires there. Those wires run across. And then they pick up a blue wire here for these last trees, and then a white wire here. And then that small bundle of cat wires is what runs back to my control box, which I'll get to in the next video. In my show, I have these things I call shooter poles. And they are C9 incandescents. They're white and red, and there are 8 sections each. So there's a small section here at the bottom, is 1 and 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on all the way up to 16. And those again are wired with that Cat 5 hack, so to speak. Just inside this little project box is a network connection wire, network connector, that runs to 2 sets of lights. So this particular pole has 16 sets of lights in it, so I need 4 category 5 connectors. And then I just run each of those wires back. I have them labeled, and then I run those back, and they run off of the AC controller. So yes, again, I am running AC power over very small conductor wires. I think these are 23 or 22 gauge wires, Cat 5e, and it works great. I think the rating on them is, I think, 3 amps, and I run a little less than an amp on each, and they never overheat or anything. I've never had any problems. It just makes wiring so much easier. So that is my shooter pole. The arches in my show are PEX. They're 1-inch white tubing. And I just took some brake cleaner and cleaned them off so you don't have the printing on them that they come like. And I think you can buy a 100-foot spool for about 80 bucks at Home Depot. Each one of these are about 8 feet long, 9 feet long, something like that. They end up being about 5 feet across the bottom. And inside there I have some 2802 strip 5-volt. And I think there are 66 nodes per arch. And I'm bringing the data and the power in on this far right one over here, and then I'm injecting power at each of the joints in the middle. I just tag on to the 5-volt system and make sure that it's got a balanced power supply. And I just use some old ductile iron parts, cheap pipe fittings. Created just a bit of a T shape. And that's how the arches are connected. They're not very secure. I probably should put stakes in the ground, but these work really nice, so I can move them if I need to. And those are my arches. In the front yard of my light show, I've got some hacked floodlights. Those are 50-watt RGB floodlights. They're made by a company called Lofttech. And I've had these for a few years, and I was able to hack them. So I basically went inside them and took out their power supply, out all their electronics, and just basically left with the driving chip, the RGB chip, that I wired to a long lead. And then I have 4 of them. So I've got 2 on the right side of the show. And then I've got 2 more on the left side of the show. One's right there, and then another one over there. And they just put a nice glow over the front yard. Thankfully, I don't live in a snowy environment, so it's nice and easy. And then the way I hack them is inside this box here. I took a power supply. In this case, it's a 12-volt power supply, I think 10 amp. And I run its power into these 2 boards. And so this power output comes in and feeds these 2 boards, these 2 DMX boards. And I believe those are 3-channel, they might be 4-channel, but either way. And then I just run the pigtails out under the red, green, blue, and the common positive. And then I just run that off of a DMX feed off of my controller. And you can see they're flashing as they're getting a signal. So that's how I hacked my floodlights, that I get 50-watt floods for cheaper. The floods, I think, cost about 120 for 4 of them, I believe. And then again, I just opened them up, took the guts out, added 2 of those controllers. I think they were about 10 bucks a piece, and a $20 power supply. I end up with 4 DMX controllable floodlights. So those are my front floodlights. This is my mega tree this year. At the top of it, there's a Gilbert Engineering Bethlehem star. I believe it's about 330 pixel nodes. I have 24 strands of 200, and they're wired. Every 2 strands are together, so there's 400 per mega strand, I guess you want to call it, that go back to the controller. So basically I bring power in over on this side, I go up and down the first string, and then I go up and down the second string. And that was a bit of an issue with the programming, but thankfully in X-Lights you can do a custom model, and I was able to do a custom model of the mega tree in the way I have the spacing done. Just made wiring a lot easier, made my injection points simpler as well. I run a full 5-volt system, so I inject power at the base. So on the in and the out, I inject power down here. I also inject at the halfway point, and then I also inject at the top. So basically there's about 70 or so pixels, maybe 50 or so pixels away from every injection point. So it's got a nice solid color rendition when it does colors across, color fades. And the way I constructed this mega tree is I use Buscoil strips. At the top, there's a custom made, let's get my finger out of the way. There's a custom made tree topper up there. What they did basically is get some electrical channel. You can see that C channel on the side there. It's kind of hard to see with my finger in the way, but that channel over there on the side. And I notched it every 4 inches or so until it made a circle or circumference across the top. And then from there, from that structure, I put eye hooks on there, and I come down about every 2 inches or so in spacing. And I get 24 eye hooks up there that hold all the strips. Also at the top is that nice big crossbar, and then some corner bracing as well to hold it all straight and secure. Literally, I think I have about $5 in metal up there, just welded together to hold everything together. And that top section is a piece of fence post tubing, not top rail, it's regular fence post. And then coming into it, coming in from the bottom, is this post right here is actually fence post topper. So the topper fits inside of the other one there, so it just kind of slides in. Then I use a little set screw to hold it, some guy wires. And then that fence post topper slides inside of another set of fence post rail right here. So you can see that one piece slides inside that piece. And that's how I do my crank up pull. Just weld it on that little pulley right there, as you can see. And from that pulley I'm running some, actually it's rather thin. It's only about 3/16 cable. It's very, very thin. And I got it at a fairly decent tensile strength. I think it's rated at 300. And I know I'm nowhere near that. So I know it holds just fine. And then I just welded a boat crank onto the post, as you can see there. And then I could just crank this up and down, and it can go any direction. So I can go backwards, and my whole thing starts coming down. Starts releasing and coming down. So it makes it really easy for changing things out. If anything goes bad that I have to look at something, I can just bring it on down to eye height, and I'm ready to go. For my structure, I have a 4x4. I think that's about 10 feet long. And then I've got another piece going across. That's about another 10 feet. That's again 4x4 treated. Then I notched out the T area in the middle where the two meet. And then that's where my post goes. I just have a couple screws in there holding the bottom of the post on. But again, it's under tension, so it's pushing down against that, so it stays. And then I've got 4 guy wires. There's a guy wire on each side that comes up to about chest high, about 4 feet, 4.5 feet or so. That's these two here. They go down to the sides. And then a little higher up at about 6.5 feet, I've got the front two. This one comes down to the front, and this one goes down to the back. And then on each corner, I take some of those dog auger screw connector things and screw them down into the ground nice and tight. And then I screw that to the end of the board to hold them. So they're augered into the ground and then anchored into the auger. And again, I live in Arizona. I don't get a lot of weather, but we did have some storms here over the last couple weeks, and everything's standing, everything's good. It does flex a little bit in the wind, which is good, I guess. And then I've got this last wire back here, this last guy wire. When I'm moving right now, it's kind of a tensioning one that pulls it nice and tight so the line stays straight. But that tree is approximately 23 feet tall, 24 feet tall. And again, it's got 24 strands of 200, so 4,800 pixels plus another 330 in the topper. And that is my mega tree. Okay, here's one of my control boxes. And I'm trying to make sense of all this. So first off, the three silver things are 5-volt power supplies. I have those three power supplies feeding into a junction system or a network of bus bars down below. And from those bus bars, I run out pigtails. And you can see out the side here, there's 24 of them. So from all those pigtails, I run my power injection for each of the lines of my mega tree. They come from those pigtails. They also feed power in to run the K16 cult board that I have here. And that's what runs all the pixel strips for everything on the tree, including the topper. Above that, you see a monoprice little gigabit switch. I love these switches. They run on 5 volts, which makes them real easy because you just cut the end off and plug it into a 5-volt power supply, and it runs by itself. There's no need for any other power for it. And then when I run my AC, these are 4 controllers in here. Those are AC for power. And they run all my shooter poles. So I have 4 shooter poles in my yard. Each shooter pole is 16 channels. Each one of these boards is 16 channels. You can see that one's labeled shooter right. And they're all run with Cat 5 cable. So what I do is I just put a little jumper of some wires coming off of each of the pins. And then I go right into a Cat 5 connector and I just do them color coded. And then I run that power through the normal Cat 5 cable all the way to my shooter pole across the yard, and then at that point I convert it back. I run it through another Cat 5 jack into a punch down into some low voltage wiring that goes up to feed each of the sections of that pole. So the wiring becomes very simple. I've got a nice small little bundle of wires here. This is what I run 16 channels of AC off of. It's just 4 little cat wires. I've been doing that for about 3 seasons now. It runs about 1 amp per channel. So at most, I'd be running 16 amps over all those conductors and those wires. And some people may say that that's not appropriate, but I'm here to tell you it works great. It works just fine. So again, I've got 4 boards in here. They're just kind of stacked on top of each other. They all have those terminal connectors on it. And it makes setup and takedown just a breeze. I label them 1, 2, 3, 4. I pull the 4 wires out this little side here with this nice rain hood on it. I pull those out, roll up the cable, pull down the shooter pole, I'm done. It's really, really simple. And what's also nice about this setup is with the cult boards, I'm able to generate DMX directly from the board. So this little output right here is generating a DMX open protocol directly to run these boards. And it actually, incidentally, this red wire leads to the front floods in the front yard as well. So I'm generating a native DMX signal here at this board to run those boards, to run floodlights and the shooters. And that's just kind of a little layout. It is in a waterproof box, so not a Bud box, but I don't think it's an Apache either. I don't know what brand it is. I got them at a surplus store. Got them for roughly 30 bucks a piece. They have a full gasket, full waterproof. And then I put some waterproof glands on this side for the power injection points. And then I just put a air conditioning rain hood. You can buy them on eBay for about 10 bucks. Or a dryer vent hood. I put those over the connectors there, and I run them through one of those little furry glands, whatever you want to call them. So that keeps the bugs out. And as you can see in this box, bone dry, ran all season, hardly even opened it, had no problems at all. And so that's my main Mega Tree box. Oh, before I go on, that's how I know what everything's wired as. I've got everything at the top there for what the controller does. It's got Mega Tree 1 400, that's first string 400, all the way down through all 12 strings. It's also got in kind of pinkish there, orange, that's what I use for my Halloween show. And then it's got all the starting and end channels that I can keep everything straight. And I'm going to plug everything in. Down at the bottom are each one of those 4 controller boxes, DMX 5 or 6, 9, 1, and 10, I guess is what they are. And those are how I hook up all the different shooter poles. In this case, they're all the green as shooter poles. And then for my Halloween show, they're just a little different. And that's how I keep everything straight. That is my main show box in my front yard. Here are a couple of snowflakes that I put in my front windows. These were 3D printed. And they're approximately 24 inches across or so. They're 100 pixels each, found on Thingiverse. So the file is available for free. Here's kind of a size comparison. There's my hand. And they add a really nice effect to the house. A very simple print. Took me about 8 hours per arm to print it. I printed it rather slowly to get a good quality. Then I also printed the little brackets that are on there that hold it into place. And then from those brackets, I just use a small piece of PVC that I flex between my window frame to get it to stay there. And those are the snowflakes on the front of my house. In my front yard, in my front porch, I have 2 more floodlights. These are 60 watt floodlights. Made by Stellar, it looks like. Kind of the older design with the older discrete. I think those are 50/50 chips maybe, I'm not sure. And those were hackable as well, so I was able to go inside there and rip out their guts and their power supply. And then I put them inside this little box here. And inside this box, I've got the 2 power supplies. And then they power into the control box, into this new DMX controller. And all I did was basically, put it on white. I used the little remote control to put them on white so they're running full power. And then they power this new controller, and then with it, I use it to control the red, green, blue for each of the lights. Each one's discrete. I have my different channels. I can do different things with them, which again is a nice cheap way of making some DMX floods. So these are 60 watt floods. So I've got probably 80 bucks in the 2 60 watt floods. Another 10 bucks for that controller. And that's it in here because those power supplies came in the floodlights. So I'm looking at about, 70 bucks or so in stuff to get 2 60 watt DMX floods. And that's how I do that. Here's another one of my control boxes. I call it my Washington Palm Right. This does the right side of my show along with my Washington Palm over here with my tree matrix, which I'll get to in a minute. But this is just one of those waterproof boxes that you can buy in surplus stores. I use some waterproof cable glands to bring some Raywu pigtails out the side for power injection. And then on this side, I've got a little rain shroud that protects the cable entry point with all the cables, as you can see, going in. On the inside of the box, I've got a K16 here that runs the main tree matrix. And it also runs DMX protocol out this port here. And that DMX protocol then comes over to these boards. And these are AC controlled. They are DMX 16 SSRs. These are rather old, from 2009. I actually still have like 17 of these and I use them all the time. They're really nice controllers. They do a great job with DMX and controlling my AC lights. And these ones are connected to my mini trees and my medium trees is what I call them. And basically I use a little pigtail here that pigtails the outputs, the high voltage outputs, into a Cat5 connection. And then I use a standard Cat5 cable that leads over to each of the props. So for example, this one does channels 1 through 4, this one does 5 through 8, and so on and so forth through that board. So for this particular prop, I needed 4 wires, and those 4 wires go off to the prop. And the next board down does the exact same thing. And the final board down there at the bottom is for my canopy in my palm tree. And some other miscellaneous things that are also plugged in down there. But again, there are 3 different DMX boards there, and they all run natively from the DMX signal that's generated here off the cult board. It significantly has dropped my amount of wiring this year, as I was able to do that instead of having 2 separate networks of E131 and DMX, or excuse me, and network protocol. I was able to do it all with E131 and then natively inside each of these boxes generate the DMX signal that drives those boards. And that has worked out wonderfully. Last thing I got in this board is a little rainbow brain, it's called. It's an older technology. It does some little floodlights. And this one does 5 floodlights. I only have 3 of them plugged in right now at this point. And that is my Washington Palm Right control box. Oh, let me explain this. The 3 power supplies here are all connected via, I don't know, I think that's what, about 6 gauge or 8 gauge wire. And that comes across to a couple bus bars. There's 2 layers of bus bars in here. And they distribute the positive and negative out to my Raywu dongles. They also supply power coming up here for the 2 sides of the K16 board. So this board not only does my matrix, but it also power injects the matrix, which I'll get to next. And then lastly, a little monoprice, little router there, or a little switch. What I love about these is they're 5 volt. You can just cut the end off the power supply and plug it right into the end of this power supply. Therefore, I don't need an extra wall wart dongle or anything like that. So that is my board. That is my box. There's my wiring diagram. This is my Washington Palm Right matrix. It is 24 feet tall. It consists of 150 pixels up and 150 pixels down. And so I do a zigzag pattern, and there are 16 strands. I don't know what that total is. 900, something like that. No, more than that. 3, 6, 9, 18, about 2,700 pixels. And it's a 5 volt system, so about every 50 pixels or so, there'll be a power injection point. So at the bottom down here, I run my data in, say on the first string. And from that point, I'll run the data up, and then I'll also run a power wire going up there, and you can kind of see it in the back, the white wire here. This is a power injection wire. I go up about 50 pixels and pop in some power, and then I go up another 50 and pop in more, and just gonna keep going. So in this matrix here, there's probably 50 injection points on it. I wanted to make sure that the color washes were very smooth and natural looking, and I didn't want to have any white color issues as well for voltage drop. And that goes up 24 feet all the way to the top up there. At the top, I just have some electrical channels, some C channel, I guess it's called. And then I just screw it to the tree directly, and then I hang a little bracket off of it with some screws on it, and that's what I hang each of the individual strings from. You can see the blue tape up there, they're all labeled. And then also right above there in that little box is a floodlight. That's one of the floodlights that goes into that rainbow brain. And then coming off of that up there as well is a piece of EMT conduit that I hung some icicle lights off of. And those are super strings. They're icicle lights of white, green, blue, red, violet, and orange. So I've got 6 colors up there that I can choose from, and they're all just dumb LEDs. And those I run from one of those DMX SSR boards. And that is my Washington Palm on the right side of my show. And I also had that exact same setup on the left-hand side of my show. You can see it going up over there. It's the exact same setup. The next feature for my show that I wanted to go over is some of my 3D printing. You can see this pole in the background is 2 pieces of 10-foot fence posts on top of each other. And I think I cut one down to about 8 feet. But that goes up one of my trees, and I just tied it at the top with some rope. Branching off each of those is a 3D printed little hanger arm, and then a little piece of PVC that holds a 3D printed snowflake out. Each one of these snowflakes, I believe, is 20 or 25 pixels. And then I just wire it into a common backbone wire that comes all the way up. So most of these wires are power, and then I just break into one of them for the signal. I think in this case it looks like it's green. So I take the signal in, run it out to the pixel and back on the other one, and then it leads up to the next. So this basically is one big array. And then I also pull some power injection wires in as well. So each one of the pixels, it might be a little overkill. There's about 25 pixels on each, and I power inject every single one of them, so I get a nice solid power supply at each one. There's no voltage drop. And they're all connected with little tiny connectors that are waterproof. And I can just pop those off. I can slide the snowflake off, and then I have spiders that I 3D printed for my Halloween show that go on the same frame. And that is my snowflake array. Again, thank you to X-Lights for custom models. I was able to do some really neat fades and some movement with that array. Also near my front matrix, I have a big matrix up here, are 2 more of these printed snowflakes. They're about 24 inches wide and tall, and they have roughly, I think, 100 pixels on them. There's one over there, and then there's one over there. Right in between is my larger P5 matrix. This is a 6x6 matrix, 6 wide, 6 tall. It's 36 panels. And what I did is I went to the store and bought some furring strips, 1/2 by about 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch furring strips. And I made like a picture frame. And then I took each of the panels of the P5 and I connected them together with some concrete strapping, which all you can buy at Home Depot. I just laid the strapping on there, drilled the holes in where they lined up with the mounting holes in the back of the panel. And then I secured all the panels together so it made the matrix. And then the panels on the side, I let that furring strip go out a little farther, and then I sandwiched it between 2 frames. So I've got a front frame and a back frame, and then it's sandwiched in is that concrete strapping that holds the P5 panels in. And then on the back of it, I just daisy chain everything over. Everything's connected to bus bars for power, and then I daisy chain the signal. The signal comes in and goes up to the first set, goes all the way across, and the next line, and so on and so forth. And that is my matrix for this season. Oh, and it's just covered in a vinyl wrap. And I live in Arizona, and it's in the heat. Like today, it's about 65, almost 70 degrees in January, which is beautiful. And I don't have any yellowing or discoloration or anything to worry about. And again, it's cheap. You can get it at any place that sells fabric. I got mine at Joann, and it was, I think I bet $30, and I got about 8 yards on a roll. And it was plenty to do the matrix and the Tune 2 sign. The matrix is run from the main controller panel in here, inside this box. Again, this is a waterproof, like a Plano type box. You buy them at restoration or salvage places. And inside this box, first off, I've got an instruction sheet taped in the top as to where everything goes and what's all hooked up in here, including IP addresses and everything. Down here are my outputs from the Culp K8 board that I've got in there, and all the different start and end channels. Then over on this side, actually let me go over here first. This is the panel for the matrix. Here's all the wires coming down from that. Most of them are for power injection. That's all these right here. I've got those run through a couple Anderson plugs, so I can easily disconnect them without having to go into the actual power supply. So I just wired in a couple Anderson plugs. And then I bring the ribbon cables in through this little fuzzy mesh sort of thing that keeps the bugs out. And then I've got a little bit of a rain hood on here as well, so it stays out of the rain. And then those feed into a Beagle Bone Black with an Octo-Scroller cape on it. And that's what runs the matrix. And that device is connected up to this little monoprice switch. I love these switches. They cost about 12 bucks if you can get them on sale. They're 20 bucks retail. It's a gigabit switch and it works on 5 volts. So I was able to just take the 5-volt power adapter, cut off the end, plug it right into my 5-volt power supply, and that is now integrated into the system. Works really, really well. On this side of my box, I've got a little cooling fan here to keep things cool, another exhaust fan on the side of the box to suck the hot air out. Below here, below that blue, is a power supply. There's a little 5-volt power supply in there that's running, excuse me, a 12-volt power supply that's running this is the amplifier for my speakers, and that's the little FM modulator that I run at 87.9. It's the same modulator that everybody uses. Get it on Amazon, it's about 50 bucks. And then I've got a little digital Class T amplifier there that runs at, I think, 60 watts by 2, something like that. And I've got a little power injection, little module right here, which just helps me get some power over to that snowflake array. Nice thing about 5 volts is you don't have to worry so much about injecting ground anywhere. You just have to inject more power. So that's what I do. And then there's my K8. A very simple setup, standalone. And again, it just takes an Ethernet connection over here directly from the network. And that's how that runs. And that's basically my main show box. Oh, almost forgot. The main show Pi. That black one down there. This is actually what runs everything. This is the show Pi. This is what syncs everything up. And then all these Beagle Bones and all the other devices I've got on the network, they're all slaves to this. But as everybody should know, that built into all the cult boards is another Beagle Bone Black controller. So the controller you see over there is actually getting its sync commands from this main Pi. And that's how my show runs. Some of the other features of my house. If we look over here, I have a 6-foot by 6-foot snowflake that I custom made. There's actually some angle iron and just some scrap iron I had laying around, some old tent stakes that I welded together to make a snowflake pattern. And again, it's roughly 6 foot by 6 foot. There's about 300 or so pixels on that. And then at the bottom, down at the bottom, that black wire coming into the bottom is actually a power injection wire and the data wire. So I run that entire snowflake off of one port for data, and then I put in, I think, 4 or 5 injection points. And the way that works is the power that's coming in from the bottom down here in this hub right here, I just grab a couple arms of the snowflake and I find power and ground, and I inject power at that corner. So I did it like at 2 o'clock and 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock and 10 o'clock. I just grab a couple of those wires and tag onto them for my injection points. So that means that there's no more than 50 pixels going in any direction up any of these arms before they come back to the hub and get more power. So it keeps everything nice and stable. Then I did a custom model for that in X-Lights, of course, because it's a custom model that I built. And that's how I made my snowflake. The way I wired it was pretty simple. I brought the pixels in from the bottom. I went 1 and 2, and then I skipped a hole and went across the arm down at the end and did 3, then came back in the hole and did 4. And basically I just hopped over each pixel all the way through. So I'd skip my way down the arm, and then I'd come back in the holes coming back up the arm. Skip my way down a few holes, come back in those holes. So that way I kept the wire nice and neat. And then all my wiring points again are right at that hub, which also again makes it look nice in the daytime. That's one of them. There's another one I made right there. That one's about 3.5 feet by 3.5 feet. And then I've got 2 more in the back by that window, which is really hard to see here from the front yard. You can see it from the cul-de-sac really easily. I think those are about 200 pixels each as well. And those are about 4 feet by 4 feet. Lastly, up on a couple pieces of topper, fence topper, way up there, I've got a Bethlehem star, and that is, I think, 140 pixels. They are flat pixels up there, and again, they are a custom model and a custom welded frame that I made. It's approximately 5 feet tall by about 3.5 feet wide. And that is my Bethlehem star way up above the top of my house. All right, these are what I call eave boards. And these are the boards that are on the eaves of my house. They go over every eave surface of my house. And what I did is I went to Home Depot and I bought a 4x8 sheet of this outdoor rated plywood. And it's got like some concrete in it or press board or something like that. It's got a nice texture to it. You can see it right there. And I had them rip it down to 4-inch widths. So they're basically 8 feet long and 4 inches wide. So I got a whole bunch of them. And then I was able to put all my different lights with different fastening methods, of course, onto those boards. So, for example, I've got those 2 white icicles right there. One is white, one is blue. And those are kind of an ice white color. And then I've got a set of green icicle lights there hanging as well. That's that incandescent white. And again, it gives a totally different look to the show. Also on the board, I've got some flat square pixels. You can see those. And then I've also got some C9 pixels that have the C9 covers, the faceted covers on there. And then right next to those are little C7 incandescent bulbs. So basically, I bring up all my data, power, ground from there. There's a bundle of wires coming right up behind this vertical pixel pole here. Coming up the back side, they plug in on this side over here, and then they all bring their power in on this side. So I can control all the different incandescent bulbs, the pixels, and even these bright shining, those are 110 volt, bright white, I think they're like 6 watt LEDs, daylight white. I call them my blinders, and they kind of give that nice blinding effect or also a twinkling effect on the boards. And then I basically cut these boards to the length that I need for each section of my eave. So for example, on the section that we're looking at now, I started over in that far corner. I brought an 8-foot section across, and then right there at the junction point where the two meet, I wired in a little plug. And then I've got another 8-foot section that comes across, and then I come over here and I wired in a couple more plugs. And those plugs are Molex plugs. I just soldered them in place, and it just basically extends the wire. And so what's really nice about this is I have open eaves. I can basically go up here with a screwdriver gun, and I can pull this whole eave set of lights down in about 20 minutes. I can just zap 3 or 4 screws out, hand them to my daughter, she brings them inside. So I have the functionality of 3 different sets of icicles. I've got the C7s, I've got the flat pixels, I've got the C9 pixels, and then I also have those blinder lights. And that's just a little bit about what my eave boards are. I do inject power at the end. So I bring power in at the side up here, and they go down the flat pixels first, all the way to the very end. That's about 57 pixels, I think, in this run, something like that. And then at this very end, I've brought a wire all the way down. I inject power at this point, and then I can bring that all the way back this way. And then I also inject power at the very end. So they're very balanced. All my strings are very balanced for power. And that gives you a little understanding about how I run my eaves. Under my eaves, that is a little, what's called a rainbow floodlight. Made by a company, I forget the name of it. I bought these about 10 years ago. And they're a little kit that comes with a little PCB board and a whole bunch of red, green, and blue individual pixels for color. So basically there's 6 of each color. So that first column or whatever would be red, and then green, and then blue, and then it repeats red, green, blue, red, green, blue. And so I think there's something like 57 or something like that pixels on there, and it's RGB, and they are about 10 watts only. They're not very bright, but they do give a nice wall wash. So I hide them under my eaves and they wash down on walls, and it gives a really nice effect. I've got 4 of them under this eave right here, and they're all right down in front of these pillars I've got in my front porch. And those are my little ambient rainbow floodlights. Here's the show box that I call my Washington Palm Left. And in this box here, you've got 3 5-volt power supplies. They run over into a junction box underneath here of some bus bars that distribute the positive and negative into these pigtails, I guess you want to call them, from Ray Wu. And those are my injection points for my front matrix of this tree, which I'll get to in a second. Also inside this box, you'll see a Culp K16, and that's how I run the matrix in the left side of my show. So the first 8 of these here are for the matrix, and then the rest of these are for LEDs up on my house. They all get signal from that little monoprice little switch there, which again I love because they run on 5 volts and you can just run right off the power supply. You don't need its power supply that comes with it. And those over there are little SSR 16-channel AC boards. They are rather old. They're called DMX 16s. Robert Martin from 2009 made them. I have about 17 of these in my show, and they do all my incandescent. As you see on there, I have some Cat 5 wires pigtailed off. And yes, I do run 110 volt through Cat on my show. It makes my wiring very simple. I can run 4 channels of AC lights through 1 Cat wire. As long as I keep it below 3 amps per channel, I don't have a problem with the load on the Cat 5 wire. I actually keep it closer to 1 amp per channel, and I've never had a problem with that this way for many years. Down in the bottom there, you see some colored wire. That's for the wires that go up to my eaves and my palm fronds up in my tree. And you can see I'm only using the output line of each of them, and then I'm using 1 common ground. You see the black wire coming in there is common to neutral, and that's it. The rest are all colored wires, and they're all taking power. I noticed on the bottom of each of these boards that they have a common trace for neutral, and I figured why not bring down just 1 wire from my canopy instead of bringing down 8 neutrals when I need 8 channels up there. So instead I use a 8 or 9 circuit wire, and I only bring down 1 neutral, and it works excellent. Also here I've got what's called a rainbow brain, and that does my floodlights on this side of the house. That's a 5 floodlight output, and I think I got 3 plugged in right now. And that's that box. What I love about this system is I bring Ethernet wire into my switch in one of these plugs. I think it's this red one. And then it distributes the signal, comes in on this wire here to go into my Culp board, and in the Culp board here, it generates the DMX signal directly that runs these boards over here. So I don't have to have a separate daisy chain wire going across my show for DMX. So it made my wiring so much easier. And that is basically my setup for my Washington Palm Light controller box. I do have it inside of a waterproof box with a gasket. I've got my cheat sheet of all my wiring here at the top. It does have a fan for vent, and then it also has a little bit of a rain hood here to keep the water from going into the cable. The cables come in. Then I use one of those brushed cable entry points. It's got like nylon brushes on it, and it keeps the worms out. Bottom of the board, bottom of the box is blown dry. It's good. It's been running for a month and a half now. So that is my controller box. Here's my other Washington Palm. I call it my palm tree matrix. These are 150 string pixels, 2-inch spacing, goes 24 feet high. 16 strings each. And at the top, you can see those arms sticking out are some palm fronds that I made because my palm tree is too high for my lift to reach. Right above those, that little tiny box right there is another one of those little floodlights called the Rainbow Flood. And that is what gives a little bit of a nice glow at the top of the tree. And then down at the bottom, about every 20 or so lines, I just put a cross brace in of some Buscoyo strip. I didn't use the mesh, I used the strip. The bottom, there's just a little piece of electrical conduit there holding it down, keeping it taut. The white wires are power injection and the black wires are signal. And about every 50 or so pixels we're injected power. In this matrix, there's probably 50 injection points on there. You can see these big thick wires are the injection wires. These are all for power injection. Then I just go up about 50 pixels or so, use one of these built-in tags right here, and I just tag into the wire. Go up again, tag in some more, and just keep on going. Made the injection points nice and easy. This is a 5-volt pixel array. These are 2811 pixels that I got from a guy in China. Been very happy with them. I don't know if anybody notices, but they're much smaller than a normal pixel. There's my finger next to them. They're really short, and they're also very lightweight. They're a little different than the normal pixels. They're about 60% smaller, or 40% smaller. They're about 60% of the regular size. And they're not near as heavy either for some reason. But that is my matrix on the right side of my show. Over on the left side of my driveway, I've got a couple of custom-made snowflakes. And they're flanking what I call my multi-face. This multi-face is about 4 feet wide and about 7 feet tall or so. It's almost a 4x8 sheet. I just got a small piece of 1/4-inch melamine and drilled a bunch of holes in it. I took my projector out and I projected a picture of Santa and an elf and a Frosty and a singing face all on top of each other with my projector, and I was able to come up with this. And if you look, for example, at the top hat, if I fire just the brim of the hat and just the top of the hat itself, that circle at the top, I get kind of a halo effect. Or I can fire the whole hat and make it a hat. I also have a stocking cap. There's also a beard for a Santa, some elf, those pointed elf collar, I guess you might call it. I have pointed ears and rounded ears on each of the side of the faces. And then I got those little wisps of hair that come off the side, these little wisps over here. Kind of give a nice little look to a female singer. And then of course I've got full eyes with eyebrows and a full mouth. Then I can do any movement. And also a Santa mustache. So basically that's about 500 pixels that I just arranged haphazardly and just connected on the back, and then using the Power of X lights in the custom model, I was able to model it out to all the different characters. And again, this was done many years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, so it was before the big advent of doing matrices. But that's how I get, an elf singing a song, or, a Frosty the Snowman singing, or Santa, or anyone, really. I even have Celine Dion singing Oh Holy Night, and then I fire that top section of the top hat and use it as a halo, kind of sparkling over her head. It turns out to be a really neat display. And then I got that running off of a 682 board that's stuck to the back of it. And then lastly is my little controller box that's sitting right up there on the roof. There's another Culp 8B board that's inside there, along with some other things that do the other lights around the house. So that is the left side of my house over the driveway. Everybody always asks me every year how I wire everything for power. So what I did is I took a couple of 6-amp wires. They're in that white sheath right there. I've had to wrap it over the years because they get damaged by the sun. And I just run in the bottom of my breaker box and run into a double 60 breaker. So I got 60 amps of 220 coming all the way over. And I break it into two 120 legs. So basically going across underneath my eave, and then it changes to red in color because of the wrap. And then I bring that all the way across my eave, and then I bring it out across my garage. And that wire comes all the way around here, and then it plugs into that box right there. And that box is a circuit breaker that I've got 8 circuits built into. So I've got 4 double 15 amp breakers in there. And those break off into those Romex cables you see right there, and they bring circuits to these little wiring boxes that I have right there beyond my camera. There's a little wiring box right there. And it's got 4 outlets in it. Each outlet is a dedicated 15 amp circuit. So I've got 4 outlets there, and then I've got 4 more down a little bit further. So I bring all the power needed for my show directly from the panel. I run it through that little breaker box first, and then I run them into those, and then I bring those wires down the front of my house and then out and distribute them to all the different control boxes that I need throughout the show. And I run my entire show off of that. Nothing else is plugged in anywhere else. That power box there also, over the years I've had to take that entire thing down, but this last year I decided to cut in a couple of Anderson plugs. And those plugs are rated at like 100 amps per contact. So I cut in a couple of those and made that disconnect real easy. I can now disconnect it at that point. I can leave this breaker box and the 2 extension boxes underneath my eave there all season. Then I can just break it there and pull the wire down and then disconnect it from the circuit box. So that made that job a lot easier.